On this All Saints Sunday, I want to tell you of some of my favorite saints. Martin Luther, of course, right? Martin Luther saw what was true and what was false and dared to name both. He called out the church on its crimes and risked his life, being declared an enemy of the state to free us from theological tyranny. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'm reading Bonhoeffer's biography right now, as well as listening to a podcast about him. As a daring 20-something, Bonhoeffer stood up against the populist movement of the German church as it expelled Christians, including ordained ministers who had a Jewish past. Bonhoeffer organized the Confessing Church when the German church declared allegiance to Hitler. Bonhoeffer died standing up against evil. Martin Luther King Jr. One of my favorite classes in seminary was all about Dr. King. I've read multiple of his biographies and collections of his works. He believed the moral arc of history curved toward justice. He dreamed of a nation where race and social class and gender and anything else that we were given at birth did not determine our ability to succeed or thrive. He dreamed that inner city black children would have just as good of an education as suburban white children. He stood up to police and governors to ensure the humanity of all people, and not just his people, all people. He walked with the white garbage collectors in Memphis with the same passion he had when he marched with the black bus riders of Montgomery. He died making us face the truth of injustice. Desmond Tutu. I've read numerous of his books as well. Desmond was known as the voice of Black South Africa. He spoke out against apartheid and used the economic power of black South Africans to oppose government evils. And he was also so in love with Jesus that when apartheid ended, he did not seek retribution, but reconciliation. He had compassion on those who had sinned against him and oppressed him, and taught the world the way of peace that he'd learned from Christ. I hadn't really thought about this before I started putting together the list of my favorite saints. But it shouldn't surprise me that the people that I hold highest in sainthood in my mind are the ones who stood up when everyone else sat down, the ones who spoke truth when everyone else was being silent, who sought justice when the system demanded injustice. I wonder what my saints would say today if they were here. Because in many ways, our country is in turmoil. This isn't the roaring 20s of a century ago. Would my saints have protested at the DNC and RNC demanding the protection of immigrants and migrant workers? Would my saints have been ashamed of the ELCA bishops who put out some little statement pledging to be vigilant guardians of truth and yet have said nothing about the politics of hate and fear that are overwhelming our lives and the commercials we're seeing these days? Would my saints be marching on Washington right now, demanding our government stand with our Palestinian Christian siblings who have been begging for help and protection for over a year now? Would my saints have convened a new movement of this church that became an identity strong enough to counter the heresy of Christian nationalism and this false belief that Christians can wield the power of the sword without corrupting everything it means to be Christian? It's not just their courage that strikes my heart. It's also my relative silence. I speak out at times in my own ways, but my voice is tiny compared to the saints that I adore. My actions are small compared to theirs. They call me to greatness, remind me of what it truly means to be a Christian, and kick my heart into gear when it's not moving with the gospel. I am inspired by them, and I am also ashamed that I do not live up to the towers of faith that they were. I think that's what saints are. They are the people whose faith inspires us, whose lives make the gospel tangible, who call us to be more than what we are, whose glory sometimes grieves us because in their light our faith looks small. And that's an okay feeling to have when it's held within the hope of forgiveness that keeps our hearts inflated. So who are your saints? Who are the people of faith who have spoken to your heart, who have shown you how to be a Christian, who remind you how far you still need to go to have a faith like theirs, who inspire you to take the next steps on this gospel race? I think of James Matson, who always just wanted to do something. He needed to be helpful every Sunday. I think of John Cookie Anderson, who showed great love to everyone, even as he wrestled with the demons of addiction that ultimately took his life. I think of Rita Bieber, who continued to sing and play God's praise on the piano by ear from memory, no sheet music, even when she was 95 years old. These people inspire me. They show me what living faith looks like. They teach me how to be alive. I want to be as compassionate as Howard Sandine, as prayerful as Nancy Schumacher, as joyful as Brett Steck. Who are your saints? Whose voices are guiding you as you walk the road of faith? Who showed you the way of Christ? During the Reformation, there were groups who took Luther's honestly modest reforms and threw the baby out with the bathwater. They went through churches and monasteries, destroying icons of the saints and any other religious imagery they could find. But Luther advised against this. His goal was to right the wrongs in church theology, but not to violate the pastoral care needs of the people. He wanted to free people from the law, not tear their faith from them. These saints, the ones we honor on days like this, who have completed the race and whose lives have been redeemed, they are good to remember because they inspire us. They give us hope. They guide us as we work out what salvation means. There's one last saint I want to mention today. This saint was very generous, sharing food with strangers, giving newlyweds extravagant gifts. This saint befriended sailors and destitute women and young children. This saint also spoke up to the powerful when they saw injustice. They did not sit on the sidelines or wait for someone else to do something. They stood before religious councils and in front of government officials. They called out the elite when they weren't showing mercy and showed mercy to the ones who needed forgiveness. Now, if you know your church history, it's very possible at this point that I could be speaking of St. Nicholas, Bishop of Myra, and one of those who sat on the Council of Nicaea. But actually, the saint I'm thinking of far surpasses even St. Nick. This saint lifted up the downhearted, shamed the proud-hearted, and filled the empty-hearted. This saint inspires me to respond when I see need, calls me to forgive when I see hurt, asks me to give grace and mercy as greatly as I've received it, and shows me how to love those I can't help but hate. More than any other saint, this saint has made their home in my heart. Because honestly, he was the first saint. The true saint, the one who made it possible for the rest of us to become saints. So at this point, I know you've guessed it, right? Every saint we are celebrating today, we celebrate them not just because we love them, but because they point us to Christ, the saint of all saints, the holy of holies, the firstborn of the new creation. Jesus inspires us. I hope Jesus inspires you. His life, death, and resurrection make the gospel tangible. It is the gospel. He calls us to be more than what we are. And his glory, it sometimes grieves me because it makes my faith look so small. Like the story the children are going to learn about in Sunday school today, where the disciples are panicking, yet Jesus is so calm he's peacefully sleeping. And when they wake him up, he asks, "Why are you afraid? Where is your faith?" And it's okay to feel as small as the disciples felt in that moment, when that feeling is held within the hope of Christ's deep love that keeps our hearts inflated. Because as long as we have that feeling held within Christ's love, that feeling will inspire us. It will kick us into gear when we're not moving, and it will bring the gospel alive in each of you. May the gospel live in your hearts. May you see what Christ sees, and may you be inspired by all the saints. Amen.
Thank you for joining us. Be sure to like if you heard good news and subscribe to stay up to date on the latest message. Peace be with you.